Welcome to my debrief of episode 5 of the VOW season 2. Before I get started on this one, just a few little comments from some listeners, watchers that I thought were kind of interesting. There was somebody called Trust Number 1, I think, that said, great letter. They were referencing my letter to the inside. Great letter, very well written, clearly expressed, and sequential. If any of your words fell on deaf ears, I can only imagine how their inner landscape and intelligence have been torched. That is true. Somebody else, Marina, wrote, it's ironic how both Keith and Nancy are playing a victim card, which is completely opposite to their teaching and philosophy of how not to be a victim. Yeah, funny that. Somebody called Lucy wrote, it is mind-boggling how they sat in court and have the evidence at their fingertips and still they remain steadfast. Reading the emails to Evie and the text to Camilla would have been enough to tell me all I needed to know about Keith Raniere. Yet Nikki blithely waves it away in a multitude of interviews as merely being proof that Keith could sometimes be a bad boyfriend. I find it very odd that they can cast the ex's motivation as being that of money-making black and white ill intent when they have spent so much time embracing and ruminating on the nuances of life and philosophy. They have cast you guys as caricature baddies, I think because to really look at their true motivations would cause their entire worlds to crumble. Yeah. Do you believe that the remaining loyalists have a stacked full shelf of cognitive dissonance, or are any of them really as sure as they come across? I think there's a lot of cognitive dissonance. I don't think every single one of them is sure. I can tell you right now that in looking at the sort of the DOS 6 that are doing a lot of YouTube videos and podcasts, at least 2 of them are in shock. They're completely shell-shocked. There's somewhere inside of them, they know something's not right. That's just my perception. The ringleader, though, is very, very sure. Very, very sure of themselves. Sarah Ann wrote, I've watched your season 2 episode recaps and now binging your letter videos. All have been awesome. Thank you for being willing to share your feelings, thoughts, and perspectives. Also, I just want to say, it's clear you've done a lot of work processing the cult experience. In the VOW season 1, you could see your anger, anguish, and brokenness. But here I see a calm, introspective, relaxed Mark. So good to see. I'm a cult survivor, a religious cult summarized in the 2015 movie Spotlight. Leah Remini's show on Scientology and the VOW have been my therapy. Many thanks to you and Bonnie for speaking out. It's really amazing to get messages like that, by the way. And yeah, I feel very different compared to, all those years ago. I mean, a lot has changed internally, but I will tell you that season 2 of the VOW is bringing a lot of stuff up. It's not been entirely good for me. I'll address that maybe at the end of this particular debrief. Trish Coate wrote, Dearest Mr. Mark, your wife Bonnie and yourself are both to be commended for your courage and bravery to expose the psychopath. This so-called vanguard, what an absolute con man. I enjoy listening to your podcast and look forward to watching the series. You are very intelligent, talented, articulate, insightful, and an extremely decent individual. Why, thank you, Trish. Maybe you should be my agent. As is your wife, I'm sure. She is definitely all those things and much, much more. I'm so very glad that you both had a rude awakening of sorts. Your futures are full of healing and light. Keep up the good work. May Keith Raniere rot in Dante's 9th circle of hell for eternity, along with Hitler, Manson, Koresh, and so many other evildoers. I pray for those who are still blindly loyal to this con man. May they have a revelation as to what kind of succubus the psychopath truly is. Respectfully, the Queen. Trish, you are a queen. That's awesome. So listen, this particular episode, I could only watch it once. I normally watch these twice before doing these debriefs. I could only watch this once. It was so intense for me on so many levels, but I'll get to that in a sec. I want to just address a few things that are interesting. So, for years, I've gotten this criticism of like, well, how did you think that kissing in the mouth was okay? Like, how did you not see that that was a red flag? And I want you to understand that depending on your experiences and conditioning, there's certain things that don't seem weird. Like, listen, I went to drama school in South Africa. It was a drama and film school. Many, many, many of my male friends were gay, and we kissed on the mouth. Hello kiss, goodbye kiss. It was pretty normal in drama school. So coming into ESP and people kissing on the mouth just wasn't that weird to me. So it really does depend on your upbringing. The other thing is, I still get, like last week's episode 4, after episode 4 came out, all the trolls on Twitter came out. It was vile. I kind of went off Twitter for the week. It was just horrible, the shit that was being said, that I noticed being said about me. And one of the things that comes up sometimes is people saying, like, how could you be so stupid? How could you not see it? To the people that ask questions, not out of ill intent, but people ask the question like, how could you not see it? It's so obvious. It would be better, I think, if the people that are mystified as to how these things happen, instead of separating themselves and being above us as though they're superior, why don't you kind of get into the emotional trenches and imagine under what conditions you might have agreed to be part of certain things or believed certain things? Because it's much more valuable to figure out, like, what inside me would have gone along with this thing or that thing, rather than separating yourself from, our stupid, misdeeds, as some people are, and saying, well, I'm above it. That would never happen to me. And I've said it before. It's the people that say it would never happen to me and think that they're above it all that are prime targets, because you do not understand how psychopaths work, how sociopaths work, how these kinds of organizations work. And if you truly studied how it happens, then you might be immune. But at this point, as long as you keep yourself separate, you are far from immune. So just 2 pieces of irritating housekeeping I wanted to talk about. All right. By the way, I think I'm a little irritable today. I think that this episode just really upset me. I'm going to go in order, as I often do. And there's a discussion that Raniere is having with a group of people about shunning. And that shoot was actually part of a shoot for my Mexican project, Encender el Corazón. And it was a number of the leaders of the Mexican peace movement that were together. But it was interesting when he's talking about shunning, because shunning was talked about a lot. The first few years that I was in ESP, it wasn't. But pretty soon he started talking about shunning a lot, shunning people. Now, it was weird to me because shunning seemed like a very emotionally violent thing to do to somebody, but it was always framed as it's for their own good, it's for their own safety, it's for our own safety, it's for our own good, whatever it was. And he framed things that were actually bad as necessary, important, maybe even essential things to do. And that was part of the discussion he was having at that table. And the thing that was interesting to me is he would always talk about rehearsing things. And he would say that every time you think about something or you discuss something, you're actually rehearsing that action in your mind, in your physiology. You're sort of prepping yourself to do that action. So I thought it was very interesting that with that knowledge, whether true or not, but I do think it's actually true, with that knowledge of rehearsing things, he was talking about things again and again and again, which I think was prepping everybody to do those things. Like shunning was talked about a lot. Collateral was talked about a lot. Penance was talked about a lot. So much so that it became part of the fabric of that mini society that we lived in and started to seem very, very normal. The part at the beginning where the journalist, the Mexican journalist, talks about that there were 11 Mexicans that were part of the inner circle. It just blew my mind. Of course, I know that. But what blows my mind is that zero consequence to those 11 Mexicans, and very, very powerful people with very, very powerful connections. And it still blows my mind. And look, I don't have a beef with the FBI and the prosecutors at all, but it just does blow my mind that nothing ever happened to them. They just walked away back to their country as though nothing ever happened. I mean, I'm still honestly pretty blown away. And people have said to me, what about Mexico? What about Mexico? I mean, yeah. I go, yeah. What about Mexico? What the fuck about Mexico? It's astonishing. But also, something I've noticed is that like a lot of people, if I look at the stats on my podcast or my website, like most of it's America. Funnily enough, very, very little is Mexico. And so many of the things that occurred around NXIVM ESP and this trial were involving Mexican leaders. And so it's interesting to me that there's this kind of like blanket where people are not maybe thinking or discussing it. Understand, I know of certain Mexicans who years into this whole thing had no idea what was going on because they didn't read a newspaper, they didn't ask questions. I mean, somebody recently, I think a week back, reached out and said to me, hey, I'd love to get in contact with Nancy. Do you have her number? And I'm like, what? Dude, she's in prison. Like, how do you not know that? Like, you were a coach. How do you not know that she's in prison? And how do you not know that even when she gets out, you still can't talk to her for a period of time? Like, how do you not know this? It's pretty stunning, the kind of media and social blackout that happened in Mexico in terms of all this stuff. When Nancy's talking about the Mexican family that is being mentored by Raniere, and I know the entire family, she says that they trusted him more than they trusted themselves. And I do think that was true of the family. Understand that is what happens when you excavate somebody, when you excavate a group of people, and you remove the trust they have in themselves. And the way it was done in ESP is everything you said was questioned, so that eventually you started to feel like what I think about reality may not be valid. And he seemed so sure. And so in destabilizing the target, what eventually happens is that the target wants to hold on to something that seems solid and secure, and Raniere seemed solid and secure, so they held on to him. Pretty much everybody held on to him because he had destabilized all of us so much that we didn't trust ourselves anymore at all. You know, speaking of destabilization, I got an email last week from an amazing gentleman. His name is Dan Shaw. Dan Shaw is a psychiatrist. I worked with him for quite some time. A number of the people that escaped DOS worked with him, and NXIVM in general worked with him. And Dan wrote me this incredible letter. I want to read you some of it and then get to my point. And he wrote, Dear Mark, I'm very, very happy to hear the crystal clear evidence of your ongoing deep recovery from having been systematically taught to massively dissociate in order to support and enable Raniere's delusion of himself as the greatest person in the universe. In my work with survivors, what I am most struck with is how cult leaders instinctively know how to induce massive dissociation in followers, and how effectively that creates deployable agents whose sole purpose is to enforce the leader's dominance and continually reinforce his delusion of omnipotence, whether that is by giving him a group blowjob, having his Stepford wives all attack Bonnie, being able to magically unknow what you know, etc., etc. Line bending you from your morality to submission is coercive dissociation. And that's a discussion I think that needs to happen. And I want to talk about it more, is dissociation, because it is what happened to everybody is everybody got dissociated from themselves. That's how things got so out of hand. But my point was, he was talking about, he said, FYI, the fifth one after fight, flight, freeze, and fawn is attach. And he was talking about that because I mentioned those four, and he said, actually, there's a fifth one. He said he prefers shame and submission to fawn, but attach is interesting. So he says, cling more, attach more. This is what Alex Stein's work really focuses on. That's Alexandra Stein. This originates in Bowlby's attachment theory, elaborated by Van den Hart in the theory of structural dissociation, best elaborated, in my opinion, by Janina Fisher. It's an important one for cult survivors to understand. Again, Alex Stein nails it in her work. Disorganized attachment. You cling harder to and seek comfort from the one who is terrifying and humiliating you. And that's very important for this particular episode because, in the case of Daniela, especially later when she's been questioned by Agnifilo, disorganized attachment, there's healthy attachment. Disorganized attachment is interesting because in the case of, let's say, intermittent reinforcement, you're getting lots of love from the leader or the authority, and then suddenly it gets pulled away, and then you get some more love, and then it gets pulled away. And you're never quite sure when it's going to come again. And so you hold out hope that you're going to get approval or love or whatever again. And sort of like a gambling addiction. You keep on holding on, hoping for that moment, and you'll do anything, so you attach to them and you cling to them in the hopes that you'll get that again. And that's a lot of what we're seeing, especially in this episode. And it's important to frame this episode with that kind of thinking. When Raniere is lying on the couch, or sitting on the couch, I should say, with Daniela, and he's playing Led Zeppelin, I see it with very different eyes now. I think I probably would have seen, oh, that's kind of cool back then. I wasn't around for that conversation. In fact, just, I was never allowed in that particular townhouse, Flintlock, for most of my time there. I think it was the last few years I was finally allowed in. There were all kinds of excuses always, like he would say, oh, it's very messy, or, the ladies feel like they need to clean up first, or whatever it was. But the place was a pigsty. It was an absolute pigsty. And what I realized in watching the Led Zeppelin thing is what I'm actually looking at with Raniere, now I see with different eyes, is basically a college kid who's trying to impress somebody with all the stuff he knows. But he's a little boy. He's like never grown up. And that's a lot of the reframing that occurred for me, as I began defragging my own hard drive, is realizing, oh, this guy's a little boy. He got stuck, at college age. I actually think maybe he got stuck earlier, but you really see that he's stuck in college age. I mean, the way he's lying around on the couch, the way that, all the papers piled up, it's a mess. It's like a college dorm, and he's still living in college. He just wanted to create college around him. So something about Daniela, she was a target, I believe, for a number of reasons. First of all, I think he wanted to, as with many of the young ladies, he wanted to have sex with them. But I also think Daniela was very, very intelligent. She was brilliant. She had a hell of a mind. She was intellectually very, very, very smart. And also, before I came around, Daniela was the official shooter. She would shoot everything. When I came onto the scene and they realized, oh, this guy's a director and a cinematographer, let's see if he'll do it, I sort of took over that job. But a lot of what you're seeing in this episode is stuff that she shot when that was her role. There's a moment where she's shooting him and he says, they don't seem to, people don't seem to capture my humanity. He was constantly talking about that. And I remember constantly trying to shoot the human moments, and there were no human moments. And much later I realized the reason I can't see the humanity, the reason I can't shoot the humanity is it's not there. There's nothing in there. And I always thought it was my failing. And he always made it seem like you're not capturing, the emotional moments, the emotional beats, but there were no fucking emotional beats. There were no emotional moments. And the thing being, being a director and being a cinematographer, one thing that's very clear, you can see a performance as you're looking through a camera very clearly because the person just being themselves, even actors who are just being themselves, know how to telegraph emotions because it's just there. It comes from inside of them. Now I'm beginning to recognize there was nothing inside there to have it come from. That's why all you ever saw and all I ever shot was him just doing motions and talking. He was just doing stuff and talking. And I think that's probably what she struggled with as well. And he was constantly giving her feedback, it seems. When it's revealed that Daniela, steals money and then she puts it back and she confesses to Raniere, it's so interesting because in these kinds of organizations, the leader often drives people into poverty. And then they might do something out of desperation to try to survive, and then that's held over their heads forever. And this is something that happened a lot in NXIVM. People were driven to absolute poverty and felt so desperate and would do anything. And then, in this case where she says, I stole money, it's an act of desperation because of what's happened before. It doesn't come out of nowhere. When Keith is starting to say bad shit about Daniela, and everybody starts to think that she's bad, and she describes how everybody thinks she's bad, but he's treating her very well. And this is the triangulation he did. Like what he would do is he would spread rumors to everybody else about a certain person that he was struggling with, and they would start to feel very isolated and alone and uncared for and hated, and then he would be the loving, stable person that they would come and hold on to. And so he was constantly triangulating everybody against each other. And this, by the way, happens more than people might realize. I think entire groups of people are pitted against each other by people that are playing these games in society. I will leave it to your imagination to see where that might be happening. The thing is, it's a strategy, this triangulation. It's a strategy to create confusion and sow doubt with everybody else. And then everybody would come to Keith for like, what's really going on? And he'd give them some reason or some answer about something, but it would always be a different reason to different people. He was very, very clever in that way. And what happened is everybody came to him for the resolution to the uncomfortable feeling that he had actually created. He was the one creating this deep level of discomfort and psychosis in the system of ESP in the organization, and everybody then was looking to him as though he was the stable one with all the answers. Textbook. When Raniere and Daniela are roughhousing in the gym, and he throws her on the ground and he does this handstand, over her. Again, it makes me think as I look at this, and I don't remember ever having seen that footage. I think this was the first time I'd seen it. When he's doing the handstand over her, I see it now for what it is. What it is a little boy showing off to somebody he likes or somebody he's infatuated with. And a lot of those kinds of things happened in all the years I was there. But I just saw it as like, well, he's just being playful. He's just like, despite his incredible mind, he's just being a down-to-earth guy. And now I'm saying, no. What's going on is he's like a teenager trying to impress all the young ladies. That's what's actually going on here. When Raniere says to her that if you're overweight, I cannot successfully transmit the sexual energy, I can't share my sexual energy. That's the kind of moment I just want to slap him so hard. I just want to slap him. Because that shit right there is so fucking destructive. And the truth is so juvenile, the truth, which is basically, look, this is what I find attractive and I'm going to like coerce you into looking the way I want you to look. That's the truth. But all this mystical, spiritual bullshit, I mean, I only started to hear about this transmission of sexual energy once I left. I'd never heard it while I was there because he always talked about, we're not mystical, we're all about science. But it turns out he was doing all this mystical shit behind closed doors. It was only, actually, that's not true. The year before I left is when he started doing that shit with me, talking about a bunch of mystical shit like that. But using mysticism to get into people's pants, it's not just a silly juvenile trick. It's fucking evil. And it's fucking evil because of what he did to these women. The way that the Mexican family left their children with Raniere to take care of and the people around him was always very puzzling to me. Raniere had convinced the parents that leaving the children with him to take care of was the best thing for their growth. And it's very, very sad because like they believed that. I mean, look, the entire system was built that way, but it's so sad that they left their children with him. But this was very strategic on his part. Even the way, like, so Pam moves in to be sort of the caretaker, of Mariana, as you see in this episode. And it reminded me of when Keith Raniere met Pam Kafritz. And the story goes from both of them is that she was with her family. She was very, very young. She would have been, I think, late teens or early 20s. And they met on a ski lift. And they hung out and they became like best of friends and they stayed together for years, decades and decades and decades until she died. Now, her family was not happy with her relationship with Raniere, but it got me thinking later, I don't think it was just that they bumped into each other on the ski lift. I think that Raniere might have known that Pam Cafritz came from an extremely wealthy family, that she was an heiress. And I think that's actually what happened. I think that he targeted her that way and then probably maneuvered his way onto that ski lift with her and did his con. And it was a long con. It was a long, long con that lasted all the way up until her death, where she did his bidding all the time, and she paid for a lot of the stuff he wanted. Understand, Raniere was still spending money on her credit cards, her Amex, when she was dead. Had been dead for a number of months already. He was still spending her money. I mentioned that I hadn't seen inside Flintlock for most of the time that I was there, and all the reasons I wasn't allowed in. The other thing I was just thinking about when the name Flintlock is mentioned, he believed that he was being listened to all the time, that all his phone conversations were being listened to. And he said that, we had to be careful, even using the word flintlock. And I said, why? And he said, because, flintlock is it's an old, it's part of an old gun, but it's a weapon, and it could be seen as I'm using words about, weapons and guns and kinds of things. So we have to be very careful. And I was like, really? They're that sophisticated? Okay, so maybe they're that sophisticated, but they really flintlock is a keyword that we have to worry about. Man, the bullshit he spun. One of the first conversations that I had with Keith Raniere, I asked him where he lived. And he said to me he didn't live anywhere. He just couch surfed. And that was his story for a long time. And then finally I began to realize, no, I think he actually lives at Flintlock, with Pam and Mariana and maybe a few other people. But he always talked about couch surfing. And that was sort of the story that we were told to tell other people if they asked that question, so that nobody could locate him exactly. Just to go back to Flintlock and the inside, some of the footage that was seen in this episode of the inside of Flintlock, that's the first time I've seen some of those rooms in all the time that I was there. They made some changes later, and then I was allowed in. But that version of Flintlock, which was around 2007, 2008, 2009, I had never seen the inside of it that way. So that's how much I was kept out for quite some time. When Barbara Boucher is sitting outside the courthouse and she talks about not knowing about the other sexual relationships that the other women were having with Raniere, I think that's true. I really believe that's true, because there was so much compartmentalization, and everybody was sworn to secrecy. So it's interesting that even Barbara, who had been around a long, long time, longer than I, did not know these things until they came out in court. The computer hacking of Edgar Bronfman, there's a whole interesting backstory to that. What happened with that Forbes article is that Claire Bronfman, for some reason, wasn't getting her way about something, and she got very upset. She had a tantrum at a training, and then she went back to her father to complain about the training and the people and whatever. So what happened is, from my understanding, is Edgar Bronfman then sort of launched an investigation into figure out who is this Raniere, what is this going on? He wanted to protect his daughters. Now that was then when the Forbes article came out where he called NXIVM a cult. Raniere made Claire Bronfman believe that this was a massive, massive breach that she had done, this tantrum she had done, and I do believe that what happened is he made her promise that she was going to fix this for the rest of her life, which is potentially one of the reasons that she's so very, very loyal. But one of the things Raniere also did is he sort of supplanted her father as a father figure, which also pretty fucked up. But Claire was blamed for everything bad that happened in terms of all the bad press. And so I think she's been trying to fix it, and I think probably to this day still is trying to fix stuff, I imagine. Now, the other interesting thing, Raniere had this theory about Edgar Bronfman. And I'm going to say something, please understand, this is not what I believe. Everyone's very sensitive right now. This is just what he told me that I think is fucked up. He said he was doing an investigation into Edgar Bronfman. And he told me that Edgar Bronfman was the head of the World Jewish Congress, I think it was called. And he said that the dirty laundry that the World Jewish Congress had was that they had stolen millions, if not billions of dollars or whatever from the Germans. And I said, oh, how did they do that? He says, well, You know how they say 6 million Jews died in the concentration camps? That's not how many died. It's actually way less than that. But they told them that many people died, and so they got all the money from Germany. And Edgar Bronfman is well aware of this fraud, and that's the whole secret of the World Jewish Congress. So that's Raniere's story. He was constantly spinning all this bullshit all the time of all these like conspiracies and how powerful Bronfman was. And that's why the whole computer hacking thing had happened, is because he was trying to get information on Edgar Bronfman. And this was his grand thing he wanted to expose, the fraud of the Holocaust. That's according to Raniere. For those of you who think I believe this, I do not. That's what he believes or believed. I'm not sure what he believes now. With the computer hacking thing as well, I was thinking to myself, this whole thing of we have to do unethical things ethically, it's so fucked up. It's such a slippery slope. And that's, you look at this weird little sex cult you call NXIVM, and you say, oh, that's just weird shit that happens there. But like, that's the shit that happens in the world. You have people that are told, the good people that are told, look, we have to do these bad things to protect ourselves. And there's all these rationalizations that happen. And so it's not just in cults. It shows up very clearly in cults, but I do see that same pattern playing out in the world where people get convinced that they're good people and their aims are good, and what they're trying to do is good. So maybe sometimes they have to do bad things to get that good result. That's some fucked up shit. But you know what? In that system, you kind of think, okay, well, maybe that makes sense. It's sort of like, these people did a bad thing and I'm a good person, but I'm going to go murder the fuck out of them, to get the good result of getting rid of the bad people. And now I'm a good person for doing that. You guys know what I'm saying. It's how fucking wars work. When Vero says these were good people, really good people with amazing values, led to believe they were doing something good. I couldn't agree more, and I've said it before, some of the best people I've ever met, I've met in these human potential groups. Amazing, amazing people wanting to do good things in the world. They just don't account for, somebody who could be a sociopath or a psychopath running everything. The way he isolated Camilla, I don't even know where to start. It's so fucking sick. And Camilla was so fucking sweet and innocent. And I do remember how she became more and more withdrawn over time and more constrained and stiff. And I think it was the emotional, psychological, onslaught that he had, this campaign he had done on her for years. But this one really upsets me. I mean, I don't even know where to start with that. It just fucking upsets me. And then that moment when Pam is going to take Daniela for the abortion. And she says to Daniela, you cannot tell them who the father of the child is. And under no circumstances are you to name Keith. What's so fucked up about this is Pam did stuff at a level of malevolence and evil that was so horrible. But Pam looked so kind of innocent and goofy, and so you thought, well, she's not capable of anything bad. So I think everybody just went along with Pam. But Pam did some really, really bad shit. Pam's gone now, and I know that people on the inside are very upset that I have these sentiments about her. But she did some really, really bad shit. She enabled Raniere's fucked up sexual appetite in a way that's extraordinary. When Agnifilo talks about, Raniere's doing, having questionable judgment and bad behavior, that doesn't even scratch the surface of the evil. And maybe it's what I think Agnifilo has to say outside of court. I wonder at this point if he's beginning to see what's going on. And he says, you can't convict him because people say they feel pain. That's not a crime. And that's really true. But it doesn't take into account the sort of psychopathic coercive control that these people do and what it does to targets. And that, I think, is a problem with the law right now. is I agree that we can't go around saying, well, somebody felt pain, so now you did something illegal. I totally agree with that. But the law has to learn to see what they're looking at, you know? It has to understand what coercive control is, and it has to understand how people with these pathologies create this architecture of abuse that when you look at a single small piece of it, you can't see it. But when you look at the entire architecture, you can see it. It's sort of like, you know, if you look at like an individual crime versus like racketeering case, like a RICO case. A racketeering, a RICO case is you see the entire picture of all the crimes and how they're related. And I think something similar has to happen with coercive control, where people have to see what is the relationship of all these events. Some of them are crimes and some of them are not. Some of them should be crimes. Building this house of coercive control, not everything that's used to build that house is a crime, but the pattern has got to be seen. You know, the law has got to change and get this. When Daniela makes out with this guy, who I actually know, who was a dear friend of mine, and Raniere stops talking to her and has all these reasons why she's breached, you know. The thing about it, again, he's having a big fucking tantrum. And he's saying, you know, these are all the actual reasons why, you know, why you've done this bad thing. And that's what he would do all the time. He'd have a tantrum and then explain it away with reasons from the education. And so, you know, in the case of Daniela and anybody else who had been, you know, ethical breachized, they started to believe that they had done something problematic, and now they were struggling to figure out how to make it right. But the way Raniere's behaving is like a little boy whose mother showed affection to somebody else and he had a freak out. That's kind of what this is the equivalent of, him getting upset that she made out with somebody. Like when he locks himself in the bathroom and he freaks out. And, you know, all the text messages you know, between him and some of the women were very, very juvenile. I mean, really juvenile. Him being upset about, you know, you slept with so-and-so, or is his penis bigger than mine? I mean, really, really juvenile stuff. I mean, he was having major, major meltdowns, apparently running into the bathroom quite a few times. And then always, you know, making himself sick or acting as though he was terribly sick from this terrible thing that they had done to his spiritual being. But, you know, at that point, now Daniela is shunned. And I think a lot of people remember that Daniela just stopped showing up. You know, she was always at everything. She was a huge part of everything. And then suddenly she stopped showing up. And I remember asking, like, where's Daniela? And there was always this vague, well, she's working on something, or she's fixing a breach, or this or that. And it was always like hard to figure out what was going on. But what had happened is that she was told your only way back to salvation is to do the following things. And it's interesting. If you read Tony Natale's book on this, because they did the same thing with Tony Natale in the sense that they told all of us that Tony Natale was a Luciferian, and that there were these lengthy diagrams, which she talks about in her book, that Raniere sent her pictures of how she could get her salvation back. And of course, it would only be through doing certain things and, you know, pleasing him or giving him what he wanted. It's the same kind of shit, you know. He was building this. He would say you've sinned, and now I'm going to show you the stairway back, you know, to like resolve your crimes, so to speak. And interestingly enough, the way to solve your crimes is to destroy yourself. That's what was so messed up. The way back to salvation was self-destruction. And Karen Unterreiner actually says, you know, the problem that you were supposed to fix was not fixable because there was actually no problem. And that's what everybody finally realized. There was actually no problem. The people that freed themselves realized that the problem was absolutely fabricated. You know, I'm thinking about the scenes where you see Daniela in the room, and I think that's what just really, really got to me. And understood. I found this out in 2017, what she went through. The Frank report had alluded to it. I didn't know it was true, but then I spoke to Daniela in 2017, and I learned this was all true. And I was absolutely horrified. I'd absolutely horrified at what she'd been through, and that none of us knew this is what was going on. It turns out some people did, the people that were actually, you know, keeping her in the room, but most of us had no idea what was going on. It was pretty horrifying. And it's like, you know, going from being a regular fixture to suddenly she's gone. It was like weird Games of Thrones shit. Like she just disappeared. And when you asked about where she went, it was sort of the message was it's below your pay grade. She's dealing with different things and fixing breaches and working on stuff. And, it's that whole fucking, everything's so compartmentalized shit again. When she's in the room writing to Raniere again and again and again, and the room's filling up with papers, it got me thinking about this intermittent reinforcement thing I was talking about at the beginning. She's trying to get out of this terrible situation that she believes she's in because he's convinced her and her entire family that it's true. And the thing is, who would you hold on to in those kinds of times? You would hold on to your family, but the family wasn't available to hold on to because he had fucked the entire family. So she had nothing. That's a level of devastation, psychological devastation that's quite fucking profound. And it really, really pisses me off the way he was trying to break her. Thank goodness that Daniela had the fortitude to finally say, fuck it. Because that's the only way out, I think, is finally say, fuck it. Just walk away from this bullshit. The moment where Raniere is making light of her being in the room, as though it's not a big deal, I find it so ironic because he's been in prison now for a few years and he's just complaining constantly. So I find it so interesting that in her case, where he had her imprisoned, it wasn't a big deal. 2 years is a long time. But in his case, it's a fucking tragedy every day. I want to go back to when Agnifilo says, well, you weren't chained up, you weren't locked up, so really you were free. When I was doing some work with CAST, the Coalition to Abolish Slavery and Trafficking, I mentioned it before, that had a special task force. They were connected to a special task force with the FBI and the LAPD. When I was interviewing some of the women that had been trafficked from different countries, at one point I'd asked, well, how did they lock you up and how did they chain you up and that kind of thing? And the person that represented CAST that was there with me as I was interviewing these women said to me, they're not chained and they're not locked up. And I was like, what? And it never occurred to me. I'm thinking, and then I thought to myself, well, then they were free. And they said, no, they weren't free because they were told certain things that if they left, certain things would happen. And also they had nowhere to go. They had no papers. They had no nothing. So they felt that their only choice was to stay in that room, the women that were trafficked in LA. And I was like, that really struck me. And that's what got me to understand that not, and this is back in 2017, not all chains are visible. There are invisible chains of the mind. And that is exactly what he used. He was using invisible chains. When I said that this episode made me want to throw up, it was, a lot of it was about what he did to this family and what he did to Daniela and the way he kept her in that room. And understand, in my letter to the Inside, when I say I'm only talking about a fraction of what I know, this is some of the stuff that I knew at that point, that I was trying to carefully explain to people some really bad things that happened. And I was horrified when I found the stuff out of what happened to Daniela in 2017. And I was thinking to myself that when people that were loyal to him heard these stories, they would be equally horrified, and equally upset. And a lot were, but I was pretty astonished that some weren't. And I was like, how? When Daniela walks off the stand and she walks in the animation and she walks past all the people there, some of the people were loyalists who were watching this, and how they could watch that and still think that this was okay is it's a little baffling to me. But look, there's a lot of complex reasons why, but I was surprised. I was surprised that people who are still very vocal on social media defending him won't address any of these things at all. I thought to myself, like, wow, when people hear this stuff come out in court, that's going to be the deciding thing. And I was stunned that some people didn't decide that it was bad. I was like, wow. When Raniere is making all these excuses, when he's that call from prison, he's making these excuses about Daniela, saying, that he wasn't doing anything immoral and everything was very considered. What, again, he never speaks about is that I had a tantrum and I did all these things to try to make myself feel better. And what none of the loyalists speak about is that I had a tantrum. They will not speak about any of these things, and I think they should. I think they should address. I would love to hear their reasoning as to, how his behavior relates to the tantrums he had. Is there a connection, or is it just like, is there no connection? Because I'm seeing a pretty clear connection. When Agnifilo is talking about the father, Hector, being on board with Daniela's imprisonment, there's such interesting justifications. The fact that the family is on board when they were lied to and coerced in this incredibly coercive environment doesn't mean anything. And saying that the father is very intelligent, well, maybe the father was very intelligent. I mean, I knew him pretty well, so I'm going to say to you, emotionally not quite with it, because there were some things that were obviously a problem that he did not handle and did not address, and remained loyal to Raniere, perhaps even to this day. Certainly in 2018, the father was still loyal to Raniere, so that was fucking puzzling. And I think it's to this day still, I'm not sure. When Agnifilo is reading Daniela's words that she wrote, "From my love for you and what is unfinished between us, I gather the strength to go against my own momentum and can be honest with myself." This is like what Agnifilo is doing to her in court. This is like secondary abuse, which happens in court. And it's really upsetting to me, because now the target is being headfucked again on behalf of the abuser by the lawyers. And it's codified gaslighting. It's legal codified gaslighting. It's legal Darvo. The other thing I was thinking about was, everybody believed a narrative that Raniere was spinning. And it makes me think that happens in the world as well, on a larger scale. There's a narrative that's being pushed and everyone just believes it. And that's what happened in NXIVM. There was this propaganda narrative that was being pushed, and you were told not to look anywhere else for information. This is the right information. And so that's why this bubble-like thing occurred in that company. When Karen Unterreiner says, someone on the outside doesn't understand the years and years of manipulation that we all experienced. You've got all these ideas that Keith had planted in your head, leading you to make the decision he wants you to make. Then she says, the reason Danny was in the room is because she didn't make the decisions that Keith wanted her to make. Man, that is spot on. That is spot on. Years of manipulation, years of manipulation. And then, that text, when he texts Camilla at the end of the episode and says, you don't want to burn for me. Everything inside me goes, motherfucker, you need to burn. I mean, God damn it, that got me angry. So, two other thoughts. The song at the end is sung by the amazing Bonnie again. It was created with Reinhold Heil and Michael Tuller. Definitely worth listening to. And then the final thought is, I got to tell you guys, to some degree, it's been very good for me to talk about these things on this podcast. I will say that this episode crossed over into I'm not so sure this is good for me. I think it's important to talk about, and I think it's important to share my perspective, but I will tell you, my mental health is getting a little fucked up from this, and I'm exceedingly happy that episode 6 is the last episode. I will, of course, talk about it, but then I'm taking a break from this because it has definitely messed me up. My dreams are full of just being back inside, and it ain't so healthy anymore. So again, I am really happy that people are getting a lot out of the VOW, and I'm really happy people are getting a lot out of my podcast. But I'm starting to feel the effects of all of the shit being dug up in the way it's being dug up, and it ain't so good anymore. So let's see how much I do about episode 6. But I think for this week, this will have to do, because I need a bit of a mental health week. So I really do appreciate you guys listening in. Please subscribe to my podcast wherever you listen to it or watch it. And I promise you, I will be there next week. We will talk soon.